Hello, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Senior Moments in the Living Room with Yolanda. And I don't only have one special guest, but I have two special guests today, and I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. But we are here at FAIRHOPE Hospice and Palliative Care, and I'm actually not in my living room, but I'm in their living room. We are at the Pickering House, which is their inpatient hospice facility, and it's so beautiful. If you have not been here, I really would advise you to come and tour. But today we're going to talk about grief, and grief is typically associated with death, but I came up with this topic because I belong to several different Facebook groups for caregivers, because I'm a caregiver along with my siblings for our parents. And there were just overarching ideas about grieving, even though their loved ones had not yet passed away. So I made a comment that that's normal because grieving comes about with any type of loss. And so a lot of times as caregivers, when you see your loved one with a loss of function, that can bring about grief. And as I scrolled through other posts, someone said, well, I've been grieving for too long. And we'll talk about all of those things, but I think the main thing to know is that grieving is not always associated with death, but it's associated with loss. And we'll get into that today. So I'll allow my guests to introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Mark and Ernie. Either one?
My name is Mark Lynn. I'm a chaplain, spiritual coordinator, care coordinator with FAIRHOPE Hospice. Been here a little over 3 years, and really enjoy what I do. Feel blessed to get to do it every single day.
Yep.
Good morning. My name's Ernie Doling, and I've been here for about 14 years.
Wow.
When I first came to work, I came to work as a chaplain, social worker, and I'm the only person to ever have a badge on one side that said social worker, the other side said chaplain. And whenever I'd walk in someplace, they'd say, well, which one are you today? Are you the chaplain or the social worker? And I am now the adult grief coordinator for FAIRHOPE Hospice.
So when we talk about grief, and I know it is an extended topic, but if you had to say what grief is, what would you say grief is?
You wanna go?
She's looking at you, brother.
Grief is a loss of any kind. So many times people look at grief and we have a tendency in our culture to make grief an event.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason we attach it to death.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that when somebody dies, we have grief, all right? Well, we have to have a mourning period when somebody grieves because of the loss or when they die. But grief can be anything. Mm-hmm. You were talking a minute ago about being a long-term caregiver and watching the decline of a family member.
Mm-hmm.
We deal with Alzheimer's patients, we deal with long-term cancer. And I'll often tell survivors after the loss of a loved one, you started grieving 3 years ago.
Wow.
You started grieving 5 years ago because you started grieving when your loved one started declining,
Mm-hmm.
when they could no longer drive, when they could no longer change their clothes, when they could no longer feed themselves, when they could no longer get up and go to the breakfast table. Every time there was, I don't care how small the loss was, there was a loss, and you started grieving anticipatorily.
Mm-hmm.
Then when the death happens, you grieve again.
Mm.
Because to some degree, you relive all of the losses anticipatory, and now you grieve the fact that they're gone.
Right.
And most, I won't say all, but I will say most people who have long-term care issues, when they're looking at it, they reach a catch-22. That's what I refer to it as. They feel the pain of their loved ones suffering.
Mm.
They see them not able to have the quality of life they want to have. They realize that they're no longer able to enjoy life,
Yeah.
and they feel bad for them. But at the same time, we're selfish. We don't want to say goodbye
Yeah.
because we love our loved ones. That's the reason that we're called loved ones.
Yeah.
We want to hug them. We want to kiss them. We want to hold their hand. We want them to be there no matter what their condition is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we live through a very long roller coaster ride of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to define grief is to look at loss. And I know you and I talked about the fact loss can even be at a wedding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because all of a sudden, mom and dad's losing their babies. And their babies are taking wings and flying off.
Yeah.
And you get to that empty nest syndrome. And that's got its own type of grief.
It does, you're right. I've experienced that twice.
Oh, I have too. Yeah, you know, and so we have to look. Grief is not an event.
Yeah.
It is part of life and loss. I'll let you.
Well, well explained. I think several things did go through my mind. Grief is very unique. It's unique to each person. Like you said, I guess for me, you know, I lost my first wife in 2011, and I remember that feeling, especially after she passed.
Yeah.
I wanted her there.
Yeah.
And she was had tubes coming out of every part of her body you can have a tube coming out of. She was in a bed. She was unconscious. She had apnea. She wasn't breathing well, but she was there. And I wanted her there. Being selfish, I'm like, I'm okay with this. She's still here, and I remember I don't believe there's any feeling, at least in my experience, like grief. And I think it's real important as Kara, as a grief support person, as a chaplain, to make sure you acknowledge that however someone feels, it's okay. That you shouldn't feel grief over because they can't drive anymore.
You should.
That's okay. Yes.
Well,
that's what I'm saying.
Here's the thing.
It's a loss of function. So.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the thing that happens when they can't drive anymore. Think about this, okay? They can't go to their own doctor's appointments. They can't go to the store and get their own groceries. They can't pick up their own medications. Somebody has to do all of those things for them, which means the person who is caregiver, they're losing their time and they're losing their daily activity levels because they're changing their schedule to care for somebody. So you have to have anticipatory grief. You have to experience.
I like that term. And when you're in the midst of it, you don't think anticipatory.
Oh, you don't. No.
Even, you know, with my parents, you know, they had dreams of traveling, and, you know, they've lost that. They travel some, but not as much as they would like to. And as a caregiver, it grieves me. You know, I never put a word to it, but it does. It grieves you to see that they aren't able to fulfill those life goals that they had. And so, yeah,
and certainly watching them hurt, watching them suffer,
the pain.
that is hard to do.
It definitely
when
is.
you love someone, and what we do, you see it over and over again, and you look in their eyes and you just see that pain, and
you do.
It's a difficult thing.
And you mentioned that you have to mourn the grief. I think people think mourning and grieving are the same thing. So would you say they're different?
Yeah. That the reality of it is, and this is something in research and in databases is just now kind of coming to the forefront. When we lose somebody, there is that time of mourning. There is that time of feeling sad. Okay. One of my favorite scripture verses is out of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, which was the bird song about turn, time to be born and time to die.
Yes.
Okay. Well, in verse 4, the second part of verse 4, it says there's a time to mourn and a time to dance. Now in the song they have it reversed. Okay. But I love the thought that there's a time to mourn and a time to dance. Because when we're going to mourn, we're going to have tears, we're going to have moments of crying. I was holding my mother's hand when she passed away a few years ago, okay? And I had been her healthcare power of attorney and had taken care of her and everything. And the moment that I knew she was going to die. I mean, I'd worked for a hospice for years at the point when she died. I knew she had end stage, and she was on comfort meds, everything I knew, but still, Mom died. And when she took her last breath, I started crying, and I started mourning, and I felt that deep pain. Now I've lost both my mom and dad. I'm an orphan. Even though I was in my 60s, now I'm an orphan, okay? And so you have to go through that time of mourning, of saying farewell, but grieving continues, and it changes aspects, okay? After Mom died, my daughter and my mom were like two peas in a pod, okay? We were talking, and my daughter, she said, you know, Dad, she said, Grandma went out the way she wanted to. I said, yeah. I said, Grandma went out the way she wanted to. It was early in the morning. We were singing Joy Comes in the Morning around her bed. She took her last breath. She went out what she wanted, but I still cry.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned crying. Crying is definitely, you know, a manifestation of grief. Are there other things that people experience other than crying to let you know that they're grieving?
Oh yeah. Go.
Yeah, obviously, the first one that pops in my head is anger. People get angry.
Yeah. Angry with who would you say people get angry with?
Well,
themselves?
some of them get angry with God.
God,
Get angry just about the situation. Angry with the person who passed.
Yeah.
How could you do this to me?
Yeah.
And you know what? And some of my children, one in particular, I would say the most spiritual of the three, the one that always wanted to please us. It took her quite a while to not be angry with God anymore. And the one thing I tell people about that and told her is God has really big shoulders. He doesn't get his feelings hurt and get threatened the way we do when people are angry with us, and he understands and doesn't abandon you. And how dare you? That's not God's attitude towards us.
Right.
Yeah, the anger is certainly one of them.
Oh yeah.
I think about frustration as well.
Yeah.
You know, you get frustrated when you have to pull things together and look through papers and get things together. As we talk about it being associated with death, you know, you get frustrated, you know, with having to do those things.
Well, and you get, and there's also a gender thing that comes in here sometimes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And you can say that unapologetically.
I
It is the truth.
I can handle that.
Okay.
But you're gonna have to explain.
Well, there's this gender thing that happens that we kind of understand. Guys get mad before they get sad. Part of that, I can't fix it. The male personality says, I've got to fix this.
Yeah.
And when I can't fix it, I explode. Okay? And so a lot of guys get angry, and they get mad at the medical community. That's one of the other things that they get mad at. They get mad at doctors. They get mad, you lied to me, you didn't tell me, you know, so on and so forth. And they just go boom, and they explode. So there is that high level where women most of the time will get sad first, and then somewhere down the line they'll start to realize they are a little angry. They are a little mad about the situation. We work with a lot of kids, and we had a kid come up with the term SMAD.
Yeah.
Some years ago, and we asked him, so what's SMAD? He said, it's sad and mad combined. And he said, that's what I am. I'm SMAD.
Yeah.
Well, there's more truth to that than fiction.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, and we do get frustrated. Our culture, 3 days off, 5 days off, come back to work, do your job, don't make excuses. Okay, you lost somebody, so what?
Yep.
All right?
Absolutely.
And that sounds harsh, but that's a lot of reality.
It really is.
We know that, okay? 5 days, you don't even have death certificates. 5 days, you're not able to talk to Social Security, you're not able to talk to insurance companies, you're not able to talk to anybody because you don't have death certificates.
Yeah.
I don't care, you know, if you go down to the BMV, Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and you have on your license that says, upon my death, this will be transferred on death to, and I'll use my daughter, okay? She can't even get that done until she has a death certificate. It may take a month to get a death certificate in some cases. But our culture says 3 days, 5 days, come back to work, do this, do that. Okay, so it is frustrating.
It is very.
And then you have to clean out stuff.
And then all those emotions come back because they're still so very raw.
Oh, very, very much wrong. And you go in and you go, okay, oh, look at all these pictures. Remember when? It's a combination of joy and of pain, tears and laughter. Okay. Recently, I heard of a gentleman talk about he had lost his son, and he lost his son a couple of years ago. And he said that he sat down with a bunch of pictures, a picture album of his son's life, and he would look at page, and he would sit there and he would describe each picture, and then bawl. And he'd turn a page. But he found it very cathartic to go through there and experience 2 years later, you know. And I told him, I said, here's the reality. Second year sometimes is harder than the first year. Year 2 can be more difficult than the first year. Okay, because it becomes real. It becomes real to be there. Second Christmas, oh, they are dead. First Christmas, maybe they didn't come home. Okay, whatever holiday it is that you are used to celebrating and that you enjoy celebrating, and they don't make it there the first time, you think, well, maybe, especially adult children. Second year, you're like, bam, this really hurts.
And I know we're throwing out times and dates, 3 days, 5 days, second year. Statistically, did I read about 12 to 18 months?
12 to 18 months is normally considered. I don't buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a certain amount of grief, and we can't rush or time anything, but is there a certain amount of grief that goes away after that 12 to 18th month? What is the statistic speaking to in that 12 to 18 months?
Well, I'm not sure about the stats.
I know, but you know what you went through. I'll
I
let you talk.
Yeah, speaking personally, it's ironic because I didn't know that. Being a chaplain, I don't get into the grief part too often.
Oh, I know.
But I was 15 months for me, and it was very distinct. That
really,
yes, that feeling of grief, and I don't think I could put into words that feeling. If you've grieved, you understand.
Yes.
But it just felt like a hole. Is probably the best. There's just a hole, and it went away after 15 months.
Wow.
It was 15 months. Right in that area.
And I'm sure it's different for everyone.
It is.
Absolutely. Well, you were talking back to the whole time frame. In a couple of years, a coworker lost her husband 3.5, 4 years ago, and went through papers. She's moving, and she found papers, some of in her husband's handwriting, and she started crying. And what really breaks your heart as a caregiver is she's apologizing. I'm sorry, I'm crying. It's like, no, you don't. No,
it's life. You're living an experience.
That pain is real.
Yeah, we went through the kind of funny, but along the same line. Okay, Jackie and I will soon be married 52 years.
Wow.
Okay, we met in college, and in moving, all the movings that we had done, we'd lost a certified copy of our marriage license. And so Jackie called back to Oklahoma, the county that we got married in, and she got a copy of it and got it sent to us. And we opened it up and we're looking at it, and we're looking at the names that are on there that are signed. One of them was my grandfather, who officiated at the ceremony. I later officiated at his funeral.
Wow.
Okay. And then we looked, and my dad's name was on there. Because in the state of Oklahoma, I was too young to get married. I was 20. I was older than my wife, but because she was over 18, she was considered to be an adult. I wasn't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. So my dad had to sign for me, and my dad's been dead several years. And we looked at those signatures, and we looked at the names that were on that marriage license, but we hadn't looked at it in years and years. And it was that tinge of, I still miss Dad.
Oh, yeah.
I still miss Grandpa.
Yeah.
And other things that happen is when you have to make cemeteries, and you go to the cemetery and you experience, okay, there's my loved one's name on a headstone. All right.
Yeah.
And the finality of
it gets really real.
Oh, it does.
Absolutely.
It gets absolutely. That's okay. That's where they are. And it also has to do with the type of death.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
Sudden deaths create a different grief reaction than long-term care deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Sudden death, there's a lot of anger.
Yeah.
Whether it's a homicide or automobile accident or falling off a cliff or whatever it is, there is a whole different gamut of emotions because of the suddenness of, I didn't get to say goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't get to kiss. You know, one of the things that I truly believe is you better always tell somebody you love them.
Oh yeah.
And
like it's your last time.
hug them
Yeah.
before.
Treat them like it's your last time.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And when you talk about, you know, a sudden death, my mom died when I was a teenager suddenly.
Oh wow.
And I think age has a lot to do with it as well, because I didn't know what to experience. You know, I didn't know what all those emotions were. But the one that, you know,
nobody
comes to
there
mind-
talking to you.
Yeah, because nobody talked about it.
Right.
It was, you know, in the early 80s, and, you know, it was just, I felt like it was just brushed under the rug.
It
Get
was,
back to
it
school,
was.
Get back to, you know.
It
and
was.
So,
It was not. It was not something. And kids, here's one of the sad things that happens with kids. We look at them and we say they're resilient. They'll bounce back.
Yeah.
That's baloney.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's baloney.
Yeah.
Okay. If you look, and talking to mental health specialists, probably half of our drug and alcohol problems could be subdued and settled if we could just teach kids how to properly grieve. Because they look for ways to self-medicate.
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody, so I'm going to self-medicate.
Yeah.
And they find a way to self-medicate. Okay?
Yeah.
So you think of when you were young, mom dies, nobody talks about it, and you're like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
I'm still in pain. I'm hurting. Okay?
Yeah.
And you magnify that because for a child's understanding, they fill in the cracks. If you don't give them information,
Yeah. They come to
they'll
their own conclusions.
come up with their own story.
Yeah.
They'll come up with their own scenario. They're very creative,
Yeah.
right? And so you have to be so cautious with a child.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that.
Yeah, and it was tough. And I just think about, you mentioned a coworker whose husband passed away, and you know, I think about what I may have needed. What's the best way to support someone who's grieving or who has experienced a loss? And that may not be a best way, but what are some ways?
Well, I'll say this about my loss when my wife passed in 2011, and I've told Ernie and several people, if I had two pastor friends that met with me once a month for lunch. They actually drove a pretty long way. One of them about an hour, another one 45 minutes to have lunch with me every week, and just being present there with me. And willing to invest that time in me just meant so much to me as I look back. And if it wasn't for them, I think I would have become that creepy old guy in the neighborhood that everybody talks about. That's like he never talks to anybody. He's home alone. And I think I would have, because I think that's men's tendency, certainly mine, is to kind of close myself off and get away from people and isolate. And I will thank the Lord forever for those two friends of mine that just were present.
And did you want to talk about your wife? That's the other thing is, you know, when you're with someone, you're like, okay, so what do I say? What do we talk about?
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, and that was the other thing as far as they didn't push it. They didn't bring it up. They kind of let, and we talked a lot of sports and a lot of other things, but I do remember times when there were tears and I would talk about it, and all that. All that is healing, and it doesn't feel like it at the time. It just feels like pain.
Right.
But it reintroduces you to life.
Yeah.
That's what it does. The
And
power,
talking about it, is that what you're saying?
oh yeah, the power of presence, of having somebody to share with. You know, I'm being a therapist. The first that I ever studied was cognitive behavioral therapy and CBT. Well, basically all CBT is talking. Okay? And if you have somebody, they don't have to have answers. They don't have to say, you know, well, you'll get better if you'll just, you know.
Right.
No. All they have to do is just show up. and be there.
Yeah. The Dr. Alan Wolfeld, is it?
Wolfeld.
Yeah. He talks about companioning
Yep.
with people and the presence, like you said, and that it's just being there. But it's sometimes it just feels uncomfortable because you just don't know what to say.
Well,
But
and that's
just being there is what he
Yeah,
talks
being
about.
present. And that's what my two friends were. They didn't come with an agenda.
Yeah.
They didn't come with, I've got to make you feel better. They were just there.
but that's the problem of our culture. We got to fix it.
Yeah.
We are a chicken soup cultural society. Let me fix it. I'm gonna fix you. Okay? No, fix yourself. I'm here to help you.
Yeah.
You know, that's what happened with you.
Absolutely.
You know,
The other thing I think about too, and again, I'm seeing one person helping them to walk through their grief, lost his wife, similar situation, and kind of build a relationship with him. And the one thing I want for him, because I know where he's at right now, he's obviously really sad. I want him to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Because that was the other thing when I lost my wife. She was such a huge part of my life. I wake up in the morning, I'm like, what is the purpose of my life now? I didn't feel like I had a reason to get out of bed. And that word hope is such a precious word. And in this line of work, you realize more and more how precious that word is. Whether they're going to pass, they need hope. The person that's going to pass needs hope for something more.
They do.
And that's the opportunity we have that I love, is to give them hope. But someone who's lost a loved one needs hope that someday life's going to get better for them, because it doesn't feel like it ever is. And then that reason to get out of bed in the morning. I think that's, for me, that was kind of a big deal.
And the three of us have talked, just about spirituality, and everyone goes through the process differently. But for me, spirituality was important. Being associated around people who could pray for me and help me through it all. What about the two of you? Spirituality, what part did it play for you in your?
Tremendous. My 32-year-old son died in my arms of brain cancer. And that was just absolutely devastating. And 2 years to the day, almost later, my only nephew was killed in Iraq. He was a Marine. He was shot and killed. And my spiritual journey through that time period of God, I have more questions than I have answers. And nobody can tell me why, and I don't want to appear angry, and yet I am angry, and everything. And I'm really mad, and I'm upset, but I wouldn't let it out. And after I did let out my anger, I came one night. I was meditating. I wasn't actually praying. I was just kind of meditating, and I was impressed that I have a faith that my dad, when he died, entered into the presence of the Lord. Okay. And my son and my dad adored each other. There were only two left-handers in the family, so they were both left-handed. And my wife's dad was killed in a tractor accident when we were 18. So my kids never met their maternal grandfather. Okay. Jackie and I just started dating when that happened. And I came to the acceptance that Steve closed his eyes in my arms and he opened them in my dad's. And that he turned around and told my son, this is your other grandfather that you've never met.
What a wonderful transition.
And for me, that brought peace. It brought a spiritual healing as well as emotional and mental healing that went with it. Huge numbers of families wind up in a divorce court after the death of an adult child. And so for us, it became a healing virtue. Our faith became as important as anything, probably more important at that point.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I know you mentioned your two pastor friends, so I just wanted to throw that in there, that I think, that is definitely, something that people should know is available to them.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
When I first came to work for hospice, I was a chaplain at a facility, long-term care facility, and in their lockdown unit, they had this older gentleman who'd been a deacon in the church, and everybody called him deacon. Okay, I knew what his name was because I had his medical records, but nobody called him by his name. It was always deacon. He had Alzheimer's, and I'd go in and I'd sit down next to him and I'd say, "Deacon, how you doing today?" "I'm all right. He didn't know what was going on in the world, okay? But I could take his hand and I could say, "Deacon, why don't you pray for me today?"
Right into prayer.
He was right there. And I mean, he'd start praying and he'd pray and he'd pray and he'd never listen. I mean, he never missed a beat with it. Never missed a beat with it.
Yeah.
He might not know what he had for breakfast, but he knew Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Jesus Christ. I'm serious.
I believe it. I've seen that as well. So as we wrap up, can you guys just give us some takeaways? What would be your takeaway for someone that is in the grieving process, someone that's experienced a loss?
Well, the one thing I try to remind people is it's very okay the way you feel today. You should feel that way. You love someone, and I believe we were created. That grief thing was created to help us to heal. It's a feeling. It's okay, and I really encourage people, make sure you're kind to yourself. Don't give yourself a ton of expectations and get angry with yourself. Why do I feel this way? And it's okay. It's okay. And
I love that.
It's important because you tend to start to beat yourself up. Why aren't I happier? And it's such an expression and a demonstration of how much you love someone and how much someone loved you.
Yeah.
And those are big things, and it takes time, and it's unique to each person. We love to compare ourselves to each other.
Yes.
Well, you got over it in this, and why am I still? And that's okay. Be patient with yourself, and again, that word hope is such a huge thing. And I think the older I get, the more it means to me and the folks I deal with. Man, you gotta have hope for tomorrow, and we talk about spiritual things because not everyone is. Not everyone is spiritual, and I encourage people. It's okay what you believe, but make sure you don't believe it just because your neighbor believes it. Look at it and see, because I think and I know we'd all agree. There's a lot of evidence out there that there's something more than this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I'd say be kind to yourself, and it's important to have hope and believe that tomorrow is going to get better. It doesn't seem like it. It doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
You don't have any reason to think it, but it's going to be better.
That's awesome, Mark. Thank you.
Oh, I agree with you. One of the things that I try to tell people is, who has your thumbprint beside you?
Nobody.
You're unique. That means that your grief is going to be unique to you. However long it takes. First thing is, accept yourself. You're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. You're walking through pain. Because so many times I'll have I think I'm going crazy. I think I'm losing my mind. I think, no, you're experiencing grief. You're experiencing, and it's yours. Just like your thumbprint is yours.
Yeah.
Your grief is yours, and you're going to walk through the grief.
I think we've talked about a lot. We could probably have a part 2 on this.
Yeah.
I definitely want to thank you guys for inviting me into your living room here at the Pickering House, and everything that you do for FAIRHOPE Hospice. Thank you, for the work that you do, and your work is not in vain. Your labor would not be in vain.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.